Live from the Panera Studios, it's the Reading with Robin show, brought to you each week by my friends at Panera Bread, where I begin my mornings with a nice hot cup of coffee and always running into people. It's like the neighborhood cheers. Panera Bread will host its 6th annual Panera Bread Spookathon, a Halloween party for all ages. That's happening on Saturday, October 29th from 10 to 1 at Dodge Stadium in Norwich, Connecticut. Everyone is invited to dress up and scare cancer. You can walk in masquerade or dance to the live music that's happening at the Spookathon. It's sure to be a treat for the whole family. So much going on, and as always, their wonderful bagels, pastry, and coffee will be provided. Go to PaneraBread.com for more information about the Spookathon. Hope to see you at Panera. And now, enjoy the show.
Let There Be Humor, a treasury of great Jewish humor and what it all means. Brand new and available now. My guest is author Michael Krasny. Quite a bio. You must go to michaelkrasny.com. He's a scholar and professor of English, American literature, and award-winning broadcast journalist, and the author of Off Mic, a memoir of talk radio and literary life. I must get that. And Spiritual Envy, an agnostic's quest. Since 1993, Michael has been the host of Forum with Michael Krasny, a news and public affairs interview program produced at KQED Radio, the national public radio affiliate in San Francisco, where this morning I heard a woman say she had been listening to you for 25 years and called in for the first time. The program's the most listened to locally produced public radio program in the country and can be heard on Sirius XM, Comcast, iTunes, everywhere. I'm looking forward to sharing lots of laughs. Welcome to Reading with Robin, Dr. Michael Krasny.
Thank you. Delighted to be with you.
This is such an awesome book. When I first found out about it, I thought it says more than 100 of the funniest Jewish jokes of all time. And I am such an appreciator of the joke and cannot tell one. Being able to tell all of these jokes, you know, I am just in awe of what you're able to do. So thank you for so many laughs in reading this book, remembering so many of my favorite comics or movies or songs or just things that, you know, we've grown up with and that you want to share with your own families.
Thank you. Those are kind words and most appreciated.
Well, when Andy Borowitz says a book about Jewish jokes that's as funny as the jokes, what's not to love? Can you talk about? So I was reading that you started out wanting to be a novelist.
I did, and I should say though, just for the record, that the book is not just a joke book. Because just what you read, 100 of the greatest Jewish jokes.
Oh yeah.
But it's right there on the cover of the book, and some people think this must be a Jewish joke book. There are a number of Jewish joke books out there. This is a book that, if I sound like I'm tooting my own horn here, I apologize. It's just really establishing a fact. It's a book that tries to interpret Jewish jokes and tries to analyze what they mean in broader contexts and get at the heritage and the values and really the heart of what I think historically lies within these jokes. But you're right, I did want to be a novelist, and I call myself a novelist manqué or a failed novelist. I think I didn't realize that studying literature, which I did, got a PhD in it and became a literary scholar, would not necessarily lead me into the promised land of having the imagination I needed to create characters and the characters that cast real shadows, as they say, and do the things with craft that one needs to do to be a novelist. I've written, as you mentioned, books of nonfiction, and I think that's frankly more my calling and more where I've firmly planted myself. It's something about being in scholarship and being a journalist that sort of takes you away from the altered state that is necessary to make up, although a lot of novels are clearly not so much made up but based on people's lives. I just interviewed Anne Patchett recently, and just last week, and her new novel, Commonwealth, I think it's her 8th novel, very much based on her life, on her autobiography.
Well, you know, I find that I've been interviewing writers on Reading with Robin for almost 14 years, and that always comes up, of course. You know, is this based? No, it's not based on me. But it always is in some way. There's so much of that, and certain novels more so than others, but that sense of being in an altered state. And after listening to your show and reading up about what it is you do, I can imagine that would be, you do so much. And with this book, and on the phone is Michael Krasny, brand new book is out, Let There Be Laughter, A Treasury of Great Jewish Humor and What It All Means. One of the things I most enjoyed about reading it is the way you weave in the history, the joke, the setup, the history, and where it all stems from. So it's really a study in it. Such an enjoyable read with the jokes woven in and so many favorites, people that we admire and have admired in the book.
Well, that pleases me to hear also, but I should add that it kind of got carried away from me. I thought at first I would just talk about these jokes and what they mean because I was somewhat prompted by a book Freud wrote called Jokes or Wit in the Unconscious, where he does just that is analyzes jokes more psychologically, but I did want to get historical and cultural and even beyond sociological. But the truth of the matter is I found I was writing anecdotes too, personal stories, which I like to do.
I love that.
So it's not like being a novelist, but it was creating narratives, and the jokes are narratives. And then I realized if you're writing about Jewish humor, you really have to talk about the contribution that Jews have made to film and to television and to really go back to folkloric and mythic Yiddishkeit, that is Yiddish culture. So the canvas became very large, much larger than I anticipated. But it was fun, and it was, from a scholar's point of view, a real fest.
But that's the thing, too, when you get into a subject matter when you're writing a book, and then it can sort of take you, there still can be surprises along the way in writing a book. And Dave Barry says, calls you the rare writer who can explain humor without ruining it. I mean, I was cracking up at many of these jokes and just remembering maybe where I first heard a joke. And I was reading that you told the joke in 10th grade. That was your first Jewish joke. I mean, that's really takes a lot of guts to tell a joke.
Well, I don't want to necessarily ratify that I had a lot of guts or anything, but in that case I did, because the teacher was this curmudgeon. I even mentioned his name as Mr. Lehman, and he always kind of had a sour countenance and disposition that was, shall we say, a little bit intimidating. But for some reason I thought he would like this joke. We were talking about the Middle East, and I said, I was kind of there's a good Yiddish word, paskunyak, which I always loved, which means, a mischief maker, although it actually, if you really trace its real meaning semantically, it means something far worse than that, like a lot of these Yiddish words.
They usually do, yeah.
Well, I said, Mr. Lehman, you know what the fastest thing on water is? And he looked at me kind of strangely and said, a Jew in a canoe on the Suez Canal. And he broke up. I mean, he was it was a great feeling of gratification to make this sourpuss come alive with laughter. He was actually holding onto his desk. He was laughing so hard.
It was probably the first laugh he'd had in a long time. He clearly needed to let it out. But that is such a powerful feeling, to get something like that and out of a teacher.
Well, it's a wonderful feeling, too.
Yeah.
There's a great deal of pleasure in making people laugh, and there's a great deal of pleasure, needless to say, in laughing. And so when I was hunting around for a title of this book, I thought, I wasn't all that eager at first to say, Let There Be Laughter, but then it seemed to be the right title.
Oh, it's perfect. You got Moses there with the rod.
I'm glad you recognized Moses, Robin, because one of my daughter's friends said, is that your dad on the cover of the book?
Really? I recognize him. He's parting the clouds of laughter above his head there. And the book is just out, and it's by Michael Krasny. You can visit his site at michaelkrasny.com and find the book and where you'll be speaking. And are you coming to the East Coast at all for this book tour?
I think so. Actually, better than the website, I would mention Amazon or independent bookstores. I haven't even set up the website necessarily.
That's true. Your website's a bit lacking, actually. If people want to read more about your bio, go to michaelkrasny.com, but go to your local independent bookstore or Amazon or Barnes & Noble and everywhere.
Thank you for that. I have to update my
welcome.
website, and I've been so busy with promoting this book and doing my radio program and
you're a busy
other
guy.
duties.
Yeah, you're a busy guy. And how did you get into radio? I found that, I really, as a talk radio person myself, in some, not in the same way, but with talk radio and really growing up around talk radio and actually not liking it very much and then finding myself on talk radio. It's very interesting. So when I saw this book, Off Mic, a memoir of talk radio and literary life, it has everything I love.
How did I get into radio? Well, actually, I started in television. I had some interest in writing about politics and current events, and somebody I knew was a news editor, and he actually asked me, would you be interested in doing some editorials? And I did. I wasn't crazy about it. There's something about television where all the emphasis is on the visual. And in those days, you're reading off cue cards. Things were far from what they are today. Sure. And I thought radio would maybe be a better fit for me. Theater of the mind, and it can go into greater depth. And all that proved to be true. I started at a very small alternative radio station and got hooked into it, and sort of that was the minor leagues, and they discovered me, and I got called up to the majors, which in this case was ABC, and did talk radio there for a number of years. And it became more and more, well, we know what talk radio has become. It became, more and more contentious and more exploitative of tabloid type of stuff, and I felt it was time really to move in another direction, and probably so did they. And I was very lucky, fortunate. There was a position that opened up in public radio, and I tried out for it, and I got it, and that's where I've been for, like you said, almost a quarter of a century.
The accolades about the radio show just go, well, I was just reading so much about this in preparation for Let There Be Laughter, Michael Krasny's brand new book, A Treasury of Great Jewish Humor and What It All Means. So many of my favorites from, Sarah Silverman and Jerry Seinfeld, Mel Brooks, George Burns. I mean, so many greats and a few I didn't know. And I especially love what you had to say about Gary Marshall, because we're also in this family convinced that there's no way this man is not Jewish somewhere, and he is not. Was not.
Well, can I tell
What
you a story about
man.
Gary Marshall that
Please do.
Didn't make it to the book because it's a story actually I really enjoy telling. I interviewed him twice, and the first time I interviewed him, I said, "Gee, I think it's still in our archives. Everybody must think you're Jewish," and he went into the whole rap about how they did. He was Italian, and he was also not an Italian Catholic. He was Methodist or Lutheran. There was a whole kind of polyglot mix in there. But when we were on that first time, it was quite pleasant, except for the fact that it was when the verdict was rendered on O.J. Simpson. And so we had, because of how important and many
it was a big day.
Verdict was, it was a big deal. And so we did the interview as a taping, and we would, kind of chomping at the bit to find out what the verdict was. And we were both sort of disappointed because we thought he was guilty when we found out that he was found not guilty. And I said to him, we'll always remember this time being together because of this, extraordinary event. And he said, "You're right." Fast forward about maybe a dozen years later, and my agent, who happened to be his agent, called me and said, Gary Marshall remembers being on with you, and he's got a memoir out now, and would you like to interview him again? And I said, sure. And she said, he remembers that first time with you because you were both in an earthquake together. In other words, what had been O.J.'s verdict became, in his mind, a temblor, a major earthquake in San Francisco, which it wasn't. But anyway, it was kind of what memory does.
It's very interesting, and thus the memoir gets maligned, but that is really funny. I would go with the O.J. verdict over the earthquake, but, you're in San Francisco. It could happen.
Memory plays strange tricks, Robin.
It really does.
That's a good example of it.
When you talk about comedians and their roles in joke-telling and sort of the storytelling through the generations, who are some of your favorites, and who would you still on your list to interview, or that you haven't gotten to, or some people I guess you just don't get to, some of your top interviews and comedians?
Well, as you know from reading the book, I did interview a number of comedians through the years, Jewish comedians, and certainly availed myself of that. In fact, I hope people don't read this book as name dropping. At one point I said,
well, there's a little bit of that, but I love it. I mean, this is, your readers want to hear the inside track on these people. There's a total name dropping book.
As one of my students said to me, Dr. Krasny, if you got the names to drop them.
Absolutely.
But there were, I interviewed Jackie Mason and Alan King and Joan Rivers and Gene Wilder, and the list goes on. And there was always something to glean from those interviews and take into this book, at least so I discovered. I interviewed Larry David. You can go through a rather illustrious list. And the publishers liked those kind of anecdotes and the personal anecdotes. So I went with their instincts here too. But there are still, comics I would really enjoy meeting and interviewing. Certainly a lot of the ones who are no longer with us I would have loved to have interviewed.
Yeah.
And, you do this game about who living or dead would you like to interview, and you could just tick off the names of so many of them that are no longer around. But I really would have enjoyed interviewing Rickles more in his prime, because I thought he was very clever, and I did have a taste for that brand of humor, as aggressive as it could be. But on the other hand, I wish I could have interviewed somebody like Sam Levinson, who had a much more sweet-natured and tempered type of humor. And that's the thing about Jewish humor. It's so wide in its range, and there's so much diversity within it, that I kept grappling with this question: what makes for Jewish humor? What are the roots of it, and who belongs there? I'd like to interview Seinfeld.
Well, I was going to ask if you'd love to get into a car with that guy. Can you imagine? How much fun would that be?
He's on the circuit now of stand-up and stuff, and I'm hoping we can book him. I mean, we book big names on my show because it's got a big audience. So, and I'd love to interview Woody Allen. Not an easy interview, I'm sure. I know that. But
not for him. What are the things that you could just, the jokes that you love the most, or the setups for the ones, and then how do you remember? I mean, you must have an amazing memory to be able to tell, to have that distinction of being able to tell the jokes. And talk a little bit about the way you've broken them up in the book, the different sections.
Well, it started out with a lot of great jokes, and just going into riffs that involved some academic approach to these jokes, and what do they mean, and what do they tell us, and how do we interpret them and analyze them. But then I realized, with some nudging from editors, that it probably should be organized into thematic chapters, which is really what we did ultimately. We have first chapter is about Jewish mothers and bubbies, and then the next chapter is about sex and marriage, and the chapter after that about schlemiels and schmucks, and so it goes. And as you said earlier, there was also contending with, well, a couple of big questions, a lot of big questions, but how do you translate these jokes, which are often made to be told, into
writing,
text? And I had some things that I felt were important to say about that, but also, I had to deal with the whole question of how do you unify these jokes really, and talk about them in a way that has some coherence to them, and not only the jokes, but the anecdotes and the material from different genres and like film and TV and so forth. So those were the challenges, and I think we succeeded in bringing a lot of it together, which in itself was kind of like putting a bunch of feral cats and trying to herd them or something.
Yes, it's tough enough to herd the cats, but when you're trying to herd the feral cats, you did it so very well. I mean, this is the kind of book that is such a great gift to give to somebody, and I love books that you can, share with people, read a little bit, put it down, read some more, although I just sat down with this book, and it's Michael Krasny's Let There Be Laughter, A Treasury of Great Jewish Humor and What It All Means. So many people I can think of that this is just the perfect gift to give to them, and I love being one of the first ones out with a book that I can share with people. So thank you for that. It is organized really, really well, and it's just such an enjoyable read. Philip Roth comes up a lot, one of my favorite writers, the ultimate in finding the Jewish mother. Talk about Philip Roth a little bit and how he's woven into this book.
Well, you said you wanted to hear a joke, and I think we somehow, other than the 10th grade joke I told, managed to either avoid or evade telling jokes. But Philip Roth,
getting back. Yeah, I was getting back to it.
No, but Roth uses one that was in my quiver, and it's a pretty good one. Just told it to a Chinese friend of mine, and some of these jokes you have to tread carefully with. You don't know who's going to be offended, and some of them aren't politically correct. But there's a novel of his, not a well-known, not like Portnoy's Complaint or Goodbye Columbus, or even later novels like American Pastoral. Or The Plot Against America, but there's a joke in a novel called Operation Shylock about a guy in a delicatessen who suddenly hears this Chinese waiter in the Jewish delicatessen speaking fluent Yiddish, and he's astonished at this, and he sees the owner of the delicatessen in the back tabulating the day's receipts and stuff, and he goes back to me and says, it's extraordinary, that Chinese waiter you have, he speaks such a good fluent Yiddish. And then he goes, thinks he's learning English. Now, that's a joke that could go to a number of different cultures and immigrants
Sure.
and so forth and so on. But there's something about the flavor of it, the cadence of it, and so forth, even the rhythm of it that has a lot of, Jewishness, let's call it. And Philip Roth made an important distinction between Judaism and Jewishness, which still holds up for me. Jewishness being more of a kind of collective identity. It's like the feeling I got when, and a lot of it comes through Yiddish, when I write about in the book, seeing Woody Allen's movie Love and Death in 1975 in a movie theater, where probably I may have been the only Jew for a matinee, or there were a couple of other Jews, but they didn't know Yiddish. And at one point, he takes this woman's hand, and he goes to kiss it, and the woman was obviously cast for her not so fetching looks, and he says, "It's a pleasure to meet the Countess Mieskite." And Mieskite, for those of your listeners who don't know, means, again, it's not a PC word, but it means a singularly unattractive woman. So there I was laughing and feeling a kind of communal bond with Woody Allen, I suppose, just because of the lexicon.
Exactly.
And, that's what jokes do, a lot of them. Stand-up comics and comedy writers and people involved in comedy at that point were Jewish. It's amazing. And if you do read the book, you realize the extraordinary, it can't be overstated, number of Jews who have kind of fashioned, and you could almost call it a conspiracy if you were a neo-Nazi or, an anti-Semite, because there have been so many.
Oppression, not always a bad thing.
Well, it's...
You never know.
It's a wonderful thing. I think it's shaped American comedy, and it's shaped a lot of our lives.
And I think, in reading this, and when people do get a sense of that, not everybody would realize where a joke came from, or its origin, or the history behind it. And so that's the thing I love about reading a book like this, where you're remembering some of your favorite jokes or stories or things that have, passed down through a family. And also other cultures will enjoy it as well and see where their own families and their own stories sort of fit into it. There's just so much here in this book. And talk about things that are inappropriate. Certain things don't play as well. You were saying the trick of translating them, into text as opposed to hearing them. But what do you think about, what is off the table or just shouldn't be told, or is everything just, okay, PC or not?
I had to draw some lines here, and I did, because there's things that are radioactive now that were not when I was growing up. And a good example of that is the word schwarze, which has become a very pejorative word. It's almost like the N-word now, and shouldn't be used. I'm just speaking about it from a scholarly standpoint. But at one point, Mel Brooks uses it in Blazing Saddles.
Sure does.
And there was, again, that sense of connectedness with the Yiddish sound and the onomatopoeia, nature of the word and so forth, because there are a lot of these sh sounds in Yiddish, schmatte and schmeck, spaghetti and schmendrick, and it's like the SN sounds in English with snarl and snide and snake, and they're mostly pejoratives. And that word became increasingly a pejorative word, whereas at one time it wasn't. And I thought there's some funny jokes, but they're not for this book. They're not, Plus, I'm a public figure, so I have to keep
there is that, and reading about Joan Rivers not wanting to, drawing a line at a Michelle Obama joke, I always wonder, there's that, when is something too soon, for a joke, or which one should just never be told, and which comics will go anywhere.
A good example of that, of course, is, and I write about it, is Shoah or Holocaust humor, because it's real. I mean, it exists. It's out there now. But at one point, when Mel Brooks did that Busby Berkeley scene of dancing in Springtime for Hitler,
that was something.
There was an amazingly angry and negative response to it. And now, you have Larry David doing shtick about an Auschwitz survivor meeting a guy from the TV show Survivor. I mean,
Do you think there's someplace he just won't go, or no?
He keeps pushing the envelope, and you wonder if there's someplace he won't. I mean, when we had that scene of them eating the figures from the manger, thinking they were cookies, I thought, boy, there's going to be outrage and all kinds of wanting to, maybe, but, why? pretty quiet. And I should tell you, by the way, as long as we're talking about Kurt, just for a second,
Sure.
for example, speaking about politically incorrect and what's appropriate, the Jewish American princess jokes have long been criticized with good reason. They seem to be misogynistic, a lot of them, and they also seem to be anti-Semitic. But I talk about Susie, that character on Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Hilarious.
And I also talk about many of the Jewish American princess jokes, which I think have a whole other side to them. What they're saying, a lot of them are, these are women who have been pampered and so forth, but that's because we've been successful in America. We've been prosperous, and we've been able to make our daughters into princesses or our wives into spoiled figures. I mean, it doesn't discount the misogyny, but at the same time, it's another way of looking at what they mean.
Well, and that's the thing in looking at the jokes, and that that part in particular of the other side of the joke, of the woman who drops the vase in Tiffany, right? And she's like, I'm okay, so there's that sense of, right, it's that entitlement, or, she's thinking of herself, not that the vase has been splintered along the floor. Yeah.
We've got Donald Trump now.
Oh, yeah, we do, don't we? I know. If ever there was a time for humor, it's a good time for it. It's Michael Krasny's Let There Be Laughter. You can find it at Amazon.com, at all of your my favorite local independent bookstores, Barnes & Noble, everywhere. It makes the perfect gift. And before I let you go, the difference between, back to Gary Marshall, a schlemiel and a schlemazel.
Well, the schlemiel is the person, for example, who is just a bad luck figure. It goes back to folklore, and even some would argue it goes back to the Bible. But the schlemiel, in other words, and Sandy Koufax actually made this distinction when he pitched on Yom Kippur, which in Cleveland we called Yom Kippur, more of a fish holiday. But he was wont to tell Joe Garagiola, who was interviewing him, that he said, well, I'm kind of a schlemiel, and, it was very important to many Jews that he refused to pitch on Yom Kippur. And I've been westernized here in San Francisco. And he said the difference is the schlemiel walks into the restaurant and somebody's eating a bowl of soup and he knocks it over. And the schlemazel is the one, and schlemazel literally means bad luck, that the soup spills on. So there you have it in a nutshell. But what I grappled with, I'll just end with this,
Sure.
among many other things, was what makes a joke Jewish. And I'll let your listeners think about something, because there may be a mystery to this except for the irony and the way the joke is told. And that is the joke about the guy who calls the waiter over and says to the waiter, taste this soup. And the waiter says, oh, I'm sorry, sir, is it too hot? He says, waiter, just taste the soup. Is it too cold? And the waiter says, is it the seasoning? He says very steely, like, taste the soup. And the waiter looks at it and says, oh, no spoon. Aha!
And there, you didn't know it, Michael, but you just probably told our favorite family's joke ever. So thank you for ending it that way. I wish you all the best with Let There Be Laughter, Michael Krasny's Treasury of Great Jewish Humor, what it all means. I love this book. Lots of people are going to be getting it as gifts, and you should be giving it and reading it as well. It's just fabulous. And I look forward to hopefully meeting you one day. And
I look forward to that as well.
Thanks for all of it.
Thank you so much. Pleasure.